Okay, get started today. Keep an eye on dogs. Hey Essa, how you doing? How's your day going so far? The Twitch previews never started. Huh. Okay, so the volume should be good today. I did add a bit of gain in OBS, so my microphone volume should be good. I tried to cut out a little bit more background noise just in case. Although I think the gate between the Go XLR and whatnot is pretty good. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you so much. Day has been beautiful so far. I'm learning Golang. Okay, nice. It's always fun to pick up a new language and try and do stuff with it. And years ago I decided to try and focus my energy on .NET because I was tinkering with PHP. I was actually doing a lot of stuff in PHP like 10 plus years ago, on the side still. And I was kind of mixing and matching between PHP and .NET. And this is in like Entity Framework, ASP.NET, APIs, etc. That era. And I kind of decided to focus my energy on .NET and try and be better at .NET. And some days I think that wasn't the right choice. I think some days I should have kept myself looking at other languages and splitting up my time a little bit into other things. And doing projects like this, it really does make me think about what else could I use? Could I adapt them? And then I worry about the productivity. Like it will take me a while to get used to another language, learn how to do the frameworks. I'm going to get stuck on common problems, so things might not be as quick as I could do in .NET. But then if I'm doing this project, it doesn't really matter if it takes me 2 weeks instead of 2 days, because I might actually learn a lot along the way. And oftentimes using other languages, using other frameworks gives you insight into how something works. It could be a technique, it could be a pattern, it could be all manner of things, because other languages implement things in different ways because they've been built from different perspectives. And it can really help to pick up that stuff. So I like the Golang stuff. Rockstone, good morning. How are you doing? Golang, really simple language. .NET is amazing. .NET is as comfortable and rich as Mercedes. I admire the work you do, and seeing and learning new things here adds a lot to me. Good. Well, let's hope that can continue. Let's hope we can continue learning and growing along the way. I'm picking up a lot of new technologies, a lot of new things along the way is the goal. And I will struggle, and I will share the struggles so that everyone sees that it doesn't just come easy to anybody. Right? So, let's get started. Thank you for the bits, Essa. I appreciate that. Okay, so yesterday when we left off, I'd almost got to an unassigned ticket, and then I wanted to assign a ticket. So let me prove to you that is working. So T9 unassigned. This ticket has no assigned user. I should be able to hit that. I should be able to go here. T9 assigned. this ticket should be assigned to BBDF0888. Okay, so we go here. And now, obviously, the only check I have right this second is to look into Couchbase. So let me ask this. For people returning to the stream, I need to make sure YouTube is on live chat, because I don't think I see top chat. Do you use the Discord channel to tell you that the stream's gone live? Do you use the notifications in Twitch? Or, you know, are there other forms? Because I don't post to X anymore, or very frequently. Is that also a good way to notify people of a stream still? Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on whether I need to run and just stop two puppies from being destructive. They're in a playful mood this morning, it seems. Okay, so here we go. Let's go here. Couchbase needs a refresh item here. So here we go. T9 assigned. So there's the assigned user. That's the one I assigned. Use Twitch. And here's the unassigned one, right? This ticket has no assigned user. So this is working. This functionality is there. That's awesome. So that is, as a product owner, I want to be able to assign a ticket to a user. When I create a new ticket, I should be able to assign that ticket to a user. It is not required to be assigned. So I verified those things. We added them in as unit tests. One other thing I did, and I'm still trying to learn about how to do this effectively, but one thing I did just for now to try and tidy up my permissions, I don't believe this is the right way. I think there's some cleaner patterns here. I need to go and kind of study a little bit, but it kind of moves me forward. Is for the permissions stuff, I wanted to try and wrap up the concept of these roles, these policies, but into a reusable way. And I think, so what it is, I created an extension method, and then I created a class that allows me to add in the claims and permissions. And then I created static instances of the class on the class so that I could define, I suppose that works, define the roles as such, what it entails to be a support user, etc. And then I created a user permissions class that has the string names, because I don't want magic strings throughout the application. So that allows me to do something like this, right? Where I can say policies.supportUser, right? I don't have to have a string there. I can swap that out. I think there's a cleaner pattern. I'm trying to study up on how to do that. Because that feels like that's already being handled somewhere. And because I haven't touched authentication authorization much, I want to make sure that that is actually feasible. Because right now that lives in a shared library, which means those permissions kind of bleed between applications. But each set of permissions is going to be pretty much focused on a specific application, right? I don't need to worry about can create tickets in the tenant management, right? But I do need to worry about create users, but I don't need to worry about create users in the ticketing system. So yeah. So for right now, that tidies it up, but I don't think that's the final solution. So that's the only other change I really made there. But it does allow me to do now without having magic strings everywhere, without having, you know, things that are going to sit out and potentially leave a bug if I rename something, right? I don't have that concern now. Again, I don't think that was always supported in dotnet. I think this is a more recent addition to be able to support a constant string there, I want to say. But yeah. So anyway, there's some work obviously involved in doing those pieces. So I'm going to add those in. Start to organize permissions a little. Like ideally, because each application will have the permissions, then probably what I want to do is kind of create some sort of structure here that will support the ability to have these permissions configured, and then define them in the application and load them in. You can add actual classes that kind of do the rules. That might be one way of doing it as well. So I wanna go through that. If nothing else, this at least helps me move forward in the future because I'll know where my permissions are. I know where they're organized. So yeah. Okay, so the rest of it is really around adding the support ticket, right? Add support ticket with assigned user not assigned. And let's commit and push that. So we had unit tests. We modified the unit tests yesterday. We got them up and running. Those are now functional. We had trying to learn C. How's it going, Delta? Good morning. Haven't been doing much on it lately. Pretty good. Good to hear. Good to hear. Oh, I've got two dogs that will not settle right this second. They just keep getting up and down and up and down and wandering around. I've got the volume on enough to hear the little pitter-patter. But I gotta keep an eye on them. So my apologies if I seem a little bit distracted. Once they settle, I'll be fine. But the one wants to play. Okay. You're performance reviewing today. Nice. Settle. Yes, I use Twitch and I usually know what time the broadcast will start. There was the last problem yesterday when we sent the request. It was related to authentication. Yeah, so here's the funny part on that one, right? So I was struggling to get this to go through, right? So I was trying to organize this. And last night I was using get tickets and it was working. And I copied the token over to add ticket and it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. I recompiled and changed I just swapped these out and it worked. So I'm still not sure what went wrong there. I didn't change any of the core pieces. I swapped them around multiple times. I verified I could get an error. I couldn't get an error. There's all manner of weirdness going on there. So I'm going to keep an eye on that as I go forward. I've got to learn a little bit. My biggest feature failed in prod like 2 to 3 days ago. I'll have to explain it there, I guess. Yeah, I mean, don't be too hard on yourself. Things don't always go right. And a feature failure is not a total failure of you, right? A feature failure in production is a failure of all those that got it there, right? A missed requirement. Yeah, a test that didn't get exposed. There's all manner of reasons why a feature might fail, but it's not on you solely to take that on. And you shouldn't ever feel that, if you're working in a team, right? If I introduce a bug to this right now, then that's on me. That's all on me, right? I can't blame anybody else. No one else could have caught that thing. But you shouldn't never be too hard on yourself. And if a performance review goes badly because of that, then you get to reflect on why. So. Logged in user maybe. No, I copied the policy was the same, right? So the support user was the same on both, but I could get a list I could get a list of tickets, but I couldn't post the tickets, so I don't know why. I swapped it out for a random string, and then it worked, and then I put it back and it worked. So I missed something along the way. There was some piece I copied. I don't know, but I'll keep an eye on it as we go forward. Permissions are something that I can always do a pass on later, right? Once I know that things are working. At the very minimum, I need this. I need to know which tenant you're in. Right. Well, we're just talking about that. My policy right now is just defined as set permissions. I'm kind of coding it a little bit, but not ideally. But I don't want to get distracted by that right this second. So, yeah, I'm kind of wrapping up policies into a place where I can refer to them later. Also wrote my first performance test. That was cool. Nice. Program has the policy defined. Yeah. So yeah, right now I'm kind of bundling them up here, which I know is not the right way, but I just wanted to make sure I didn't have any strings hanging out. What kind of tests would you write for the permissions? Do you test them in integration type? Yeah, I'd have to write some integration tests to validate permissions, because I would have to be invoking the API. So I'd have to go through that effort of getting it started up and making sure I can log in and do all those sorts of things. So some automated testing there would be beneficial. Again, I need to at some point create a command line where I can auth and get a token back, so I don't have to start the application, and then I can invoke that and then just call all the endpoints that I need. Do I have tests run all? 1 second. Yeah, I'll check that out. But like I said, right now, auth is the least of my concerns overall. I can log in and I can get the tenant. That is my biggest concern. Once I move beyond these initial phases and I start to worry about who should be doing things more, then I'll have to concern myself with that. I've started studying some logic and maths, so I've paused the mini project for now. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the benefit. I mean, I'm going to assume you're a little younger Rockstone than I am, but you know, it's the benefit of being inquisitive, right? You can explore all sorts of different things, and nothing's necessarily wrong if you learn and improve from it. Tests are slow, would make for a crappy unit test though. Well, I think if depending on what you're testing, I think you should accept that some things are going to be a little slower. So, okay, so we push this, right? Let's go to GitHub. Repositories. Liquid Sky. I'll leave you two to discuss the testing piece. Okay, so we're going to create a pull request. Oh, no, we're not. No, we're not. We're going to edit that quickly. I do not want to go to main. I should not merge into main at this point. Main will be my release pipeline, right? So development is my branch that everything's going to get merged up into until I make my first release. Then I will do a release off of main. So let's do my review. Support. Yeah, because I've made all those policy changes, I've kind of made a mess there. I kind of did this includes thing to try and add these policies in. Again, I'm putting layers on top of layers here, which doesn't always feel good. So I will review this because it feels like there's something. Oh, this should be something here. I just don't. I'm not going to learn that right this second. And to aid in readability, this is how I'm doing the permissions things, right? So I'm doing an implicit string, so that if you treat it as a string, it will give you this back. And that's how that works as well. That will be implicitly cast to a string. Add authorization, configure the pipeline. Somehow I managed to put a space in there. I've added a signed user ID in there. I've added it into the command. I've switched this out because Mediator seems to create some more specific interfaces So it has iSender, which is the sender. I believe iPublisher if I'm just publishing events. So they have more specific interfaces than just iMediator. So I kind of like this because it means that I can't, if I have an interface that is, it'll publish, it'll send, it'll do all manner of things, then someone else comes along to that code and tries to work in it. They might think, oh, well, I can just call this and I'll just put that in there. But if you put iSender in there, you are very explicitly saying, right, I don't care about the implementation, but it should only be this. So it does help narrow the scope a little bit and increase readability. So having a more specific interface there rather than iMediator, I kind of like. And I don't know if Mediator has that. But I just discovered it because a writer suggested it after I refactored it to a primary constructor. So we're sending, commented out. I commented out cause. That wouldn't have done it, would it? Cause wouldn't have done that. We'll come back around on that one afterwards. I commented out the cause thing. Calls will be required when I go to use Kubernetes because all these APIs may be receiving requests from other things, right? So I'm going to need calls of some form. Health checks there. I reorganized the base. I added user secrets, but I didn't add them. I didn't add any. And then I've got my unit tests. User assigned is set. Ticket has review date. Ticket has added date. Ticket has customer name. Ticket has description. Yep. And then not assigned. User assigned is not set. I think we're good on that one. Merge pull request. Delete branch. Okay, so now we check out development, account, development update. So I'm hoping I can keep up this sort of cadence where I can get some stories done multiple times a week. Right now it feels like really solid progress. I think it's moving along fine for my liking. I'm balancing the whole stream to dev piece in a way that I'm comfortable with. So let's move that over. So let's go on to this one. Now this isn't the last one, obviously. If I'll be able to get this done and probably move on to something else today, but we can discuss what's next. And actually, like I said yesterday, there's something I do want to cover in terms of shared data. the art of review. So your logic can be simplified. Thinking about it, I overcomplicated it. the after the fact. Yeah, I could have done that differently. Okay, so let's talk about the description here. So what I want to do is as well is when I go further forward with stories, maybe I'll get into the habit of planning out a sprint essentially, and trying to get into that cadence with the stream so that we can have maybe a sprint planning stream. Not wholly, because I think coding still holds more interest, but at least because of the nature of the product, right? Being able to sit down and review the stories that we're going to do in the next 2 weeks of streams, and being able to do the analysis and give everyone a chance to kind of see, what questions would you ask? How would you change this story? What is worded incorrectly, right? To try and continue the point of this is why I'm doing this, right? To help explore and refine the art of writing a good ticket, writing a good story. So yeah. I'm just not getting engaged in that because there's a lot taken in that project, and it seems like a productive conversation in terms of information there, Delta. So as a user, I should be able to see tickets assigned to me, right? So basically, when I log in and list tickets, I should see only those tickets assigned to me. So we get into the realm here of roles, ironically. I got something itching my nose and it's bothering me. When I log in and list tickets, I should only see those tickets assigned to me, right? So if I do this, then I kind of need some follow-up stories pretty quickly, because I need to do, as a admin user, I should see all tickets, or as a, I should see all unassigned tickets, etc. So this kind of explores that path a little bit, in that what do I actually need here versus what am I asking for? So as a user, I should be able to see tickets assigned to me. It's probably a little bit broad. It's probably not realistic. I'm not filtering them, right? Filtering would come later. And again, I know I'm going to need features in the future. I know I'm going to need stuff, but I'm not developing it. I'm deliberately not trying to rush ahead and develop stuff that I don't need right this second. Filtering and all those sorts of things, they're going to come once I need a UI. They're not going to need. I'm not going to need them as part of an API specifically. So so an ad break's about to start. If you fall into an ad break and you're watching and paying attention, let me know. I will happily pause if people are stuck behind an ad. So when I log in and list tickets, I should see only those tickets assigned to me. This is a very narrow behavior, and it's more filtering though. But I don't want advanced levels of filtering right this second. Show tickets assigned to this user, show tickets assigned to this user. But if I implement this story right now, as I've defined it, then all I'll do is be able to see the tickets that are actually assigned to me. I'll never be able to see tickets that are there. So should I see tickets assigned to me and unassigned? Is that helpful right now? Yes, because it means I could pick up a ticket that needs to be done. Do I have any challenges to that? No, because it's a simple, if my user ID is there, just do a query that is, if it's assigned or it's not assigned at all, then that might work. So let's change that a little bit. As a user, I should see tickets unassigned and tickets assigned to me. As a normal user, as a support user. So it's probably helpful to get into a mindset of trying to identify those roles and pull those roles apart. Now I've gone back over roles and done that little review. It's probably helpful to start defining who is who. So I'm going to define a support user as someone who can add tickets, can list tickets, and can right now read tickets, right? I haven't got even into the read and edit part. So we'll go with support user for now. Nice. I like the I like the discussion going on. As a support user, I should be able to see a list of tickets. I should only see unassigned tickets and those tickets assigned to my user. So testing this will actually be a little harder than anything else because it's query, right? So let's just leave it like that for right this second. I don't think there's any confusion there. As a support user, that's my role. I should be able to see a list of tickets. Do I want to deal with support admin at this point? Does it matter? Yes. Now, if I was a PM, I'd try and get it all in this story. But it's a little bit more complicated from our side of things. But why does he want to see it? I think either requirement goes in there or tasks or both. Well, the challenge is, though, that the concept of administrator is a authentication / authorization piece, right? Well, authentication piece. So if I do that, I have to consider how do I relay that information effectively? There's no concept of who's who in the database at this point, right? So we get back into the world of permissions, etc. And I want to move relatively quickly through this piece for the purpose of the discussion of who owns what data, right? Because this will bring up another challenge. Right now we don't show who is the assigned user. But I don't have a name, I have a GUID, right? So I can filter the list, but this would immediately bring up a challenge, right? So let's go into that. Actually, now is a good time because I think it's part of this story. It should be identified as part of this, right? So yeah. Well, again, you can't just take what I'm writing there and say that's the work, right? Because that's not the work. The work has to be understood. It isn't a task; it's a story because it is. There's a little bit more effort there. Now I have done some of the work. I've laid some of the groundwork for this, so it's not like I'm starting from scratch. But but in the process, I should be analyzing this a bit better. Have you ever tried example mapping to begin with? I found them to be really useful to understand what the work is. Example mapping. Behavioral. This is event storming, essentially. It's the same concept as event storming, right? But it's more focused on the actual pieces of work rather than the actual. Well, event storming is really figuring out what what happens across your domain, right? Event storming is the things that transfer across and all the things that should happen interactive wise. This is like, here's an actual thing, here's the story. Huh. 2015. I've never heard of example mapping. I'll give it a look. Yeah, I can see it's a smaller scope because it is focused on the actual piece of work rather than the global impact of that work. Whereas event storming is more, here are the things that are happening across the system. Okay, so, but I'm not gonna, as much as I want to divert and try and adapt new techniques as well, and I should. That's learning is part of this, right? I also want to continue to move forward and do whatever studying I need to do, because I don't know how to do that right this second. I don't know how to apply it to what I've done already. So I will review though, because that might help in defining these and might help us together, refine our story writing techniques. So, but in this example, right, the use case here is actually, I am a user. I want to log into the ticketing system, and I want to be able to see the work that I have been assigned and any work that should be set out there to be done. Right. So we have a challenge in that I want a list of that data, right? So how do I do? And it's a very simple one here, right? If I see a list, let's run it. So this kind of gets into the conversation we're going to have anyway. So I might as well do it now rather than wait till later and kind of come around on it. JetBrains in the latest version of Rider made a change, so you can right click and say run multiple projects, and then just check the boxes on the projects you want to run. But I don't know why they haven't embraced this, because this works way better. The global, what's it called? The consolidated start. I can add whatever projects I want, structure them in folders, and run them that way. You've seen the story splitting stuff, I'm assuming 2D Gamer, story splitting. Story splitting. Remind me. This is Rider. This isn't Fleet. Just new UI Rider. What do you mean, in what context, Dota? Have I seen story splitting? Normal today in the YouTube channel. Okay, let's have a look. User stories are vertical slices to get the most of the investor. Yeah, kind of agree. Kind of agree. Right, so it's techniques in how to actually define. Every story should add some increment of visible value for users. Okay, so we shouldn't put stories into a sprint that are, I need to deploy the system, or I need to I have to type it because I don't have it. Chris getting the story splitting. Yeah, same chart, right? Yeah. It's the flowchart you're trying to point me to. It's just yeah, it's download it as I don't want to download it as a poster. I want to see the picture. You scared I'm going to take your material? I'm not giving you my details just because. No. Okay. But anyway, my point was, right, so business value, right? Let's look at these. These are the actual points, right? Independent means the good story is sufficiently self-contained that it can be prioritized by something other than technical dependency. We'll go into why this is hard in practice, right? Sometimes that means temporarily building some scaffolding so a story can be tested independently, allowing you to do it sooner or get value or reduce risk early in the project. N is for negotiable. A good story leaves room for collaboration on the details of what and how. Of course, as a collaboration happens and you capture more detail, the story becomes less negotiable. V is for valuable. Every story should add some increment of visible value for users. Right now, this may seem impossible. You may have a backlog full of components and infrastructure tasks pretending to be stories, which don't add value for users, but as you develop your story splitting skills, you'll get better at finding thin slices of functionality that deliver direct value. Stories don't need to provide enough value by themselves to be worth shipping. You might need to accumulate several stories to move from valuable to marketable. E is for estimable. I have to say the word. A good story is defined through that. The team can estimate how big it is, usually relative to other stories. Totally agree. S is for small. A rule of thumb for small enough is by the time a story makes it to the top of your backlog, you should be able to fit 6 to 10 into a sprint. This is about getting frequent feedback and managing risk without having too many stories to manage. Finally, T is for testable. You should have some way to know we're done in the story. So, in principle, I agree with everything overall, right? N is for negotiable. I is for independent, right? Right. Independent is good. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Invest is what they sell. Valuable. Again, they acknowledge the challenge, but they don't tell you how to. But what they're suggesting is that what you want to do is try and weed out the little pieces so you can always get visible value. Estimable. Yeah, I mean, if it's good, you should be able to clearly estimate. Will over time we will develop a standard of stories, and I should start pointing these. Right now, there's no value in pointing them because it's very waterfall in my approach. Right. Prioritization is not the development task, though. Right. That's not. Prioritization is not for you to worry about. Right. For the team, this is what is workable. Right. For the development team, these matter for the development of it. Right. Small, again, small enough. I don't agree with putting a number on it. That is not realistic. Estimating effort is, and that helps people understand to set expectations. So they do work hand in hand, but the developers are the only ones that can estimate. And testable, obviously, we can't disagree with testable, especially considering the conversation that just went on, right? But this relies upon stories being relies upon a workflow that is improving constantly. It relies upon people who are creating these stories, which are not the developers, right? Exactly, Doctor. I'll come back to that in a second. I really need to stop glancing over there when I'm saying something. I see it moving the corner of my hand. I can't not get distracted. But it relies upon a process. It relies upon people who are planning and preparing this work and getting these items out, right? Putting in basic pieces, allowing the developers to kind of acknowledge the work, but also then say, no, that's a story, hold on, let's do this. And that's the negotiable part of that, right? That's the you've got to have some flexibility to be able to say, no, that isn't actually part of that story, this belongs here, this is actually this story, right? But in the workflows that I've normally worked in, it's like, hey, here's a sprint's worth of work, let's do it. But the sprint starts on Monday. Yeah, let's do this sprint, right? There's no time for this negotiation, for this estimable to be accurate, right? What I will get to, like I said, is a kind of a standard story practice where I say, okay, let me go back over here. Here's a slice, right? So adding a screen with a grid on it, and I've used this example, I've used this particular story in a past job. Adding a screen, adding the database logic to query the data, and adding the table structure to actually store the data is a 3-point story, say, right? So everything's based off that. Is it more or less difficult than that story, right? That's your estimation part, right? So coming up with a story that the team agrees upon as being a good measure of a regular, because we do it, right? There's a lot of common stories, right? Oh, I need to add a screen, I need to add a button here, I need to do this database query, I need to do this data change, I need to do this database modification. Here's a 3. Everything's relative to that 3, say, right? We did the rule of 3s, 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. Yeah, put it in one of those bins of the size of the work has to be estimated. So there's several different ways of going at it. Negotiation to me is what goes in the PR, not negotiating on how long the PR will take. I'm not saying negotiating, I'm saying negotiating the work. We just use example mapping. If the story is too complex, has too many rules, we split it up. If we have a story we're comfortable with, it usually has the same complexity as any other story, so we don't need to estimate it. Adding a screen, changing something in a DB isn't a story. Yeah, I wonder if example mapping is how you're getting your stories smaller. But it does kind of highlight the fact that we're all developers working in, and I don't like air quoting, but agile workflows, but we're doing it differently, right? And again, it's what works for your team. As long as you're effectively delivering stable, reliable, maintainable software, does it really matter that someone's tried to put a definition around it, right? If teams are trying to follow these practices, and the teams I'm working with are trying to follow these practices, they've got to embrace the practices, is my point, right? You've got to do this right. It relies upon good product management saying, here's actually what we want to achieve in Q2, right? And we're in Q1, right? Or let's say Q1 now, right? Last week, we should have had a sit-down meeting where I said, here's the planned work for Q1. Here's what we want to achieve, right? Let's go over this. Let's put in some, you meet with the high-level people first, the architects, etc., to sit down and go through the high level pieces. We need to develop these changes. We need to develop these. Those aren't specifically stories, but they're big enough to say, here's what I think it should take. Now let's go to the team and present this. And again, that architect or those people that are more engineering focused are able to present to the developers, here's the things that we need to do. And those developers say, no, you're forgetting about this, and be like, oh yeah, I did forget about that. That needs to be redressed. So we need to put some more work in there. We need to put some stories in. So you're constantly refining that process. Senior developers, architects, they can go in, right? Estimating, I've seen get extremely toxic, so I actively fight it. Estimating, I think it doesn't if you were doing well, but I was working as a consultant and I have seen many Scrum waterfall bastardizations that had absurd interpretations of what they call Agile and focusing on the basics and re-explaining what they actually mean really help those teams understand the value of it all. Yeah, I think most most groups I've worked with so far, I mean, I haven't done consultancy, so I haven't had a broad experience there, but I will say that just the experience I've had, I've worked in several places now that have done Agile, and no one's done Agile. They end up on a version of it. The best process I ever went through was kind of this sit down here, present what needs to be done, what needs to be achieved, and basically had a day of brainstorming, even with SMEs, to sit down and say, here's what we need this sort of functionality, we need this sort of functionality, and the developers were able to generate stories, and the product managers could take those, they were literally post-its, and generate a set of stories that we could then sit down and refine, and many weeks were given to that process, and that process was done over the prototyping phase, right? So we were able to plan while testing and tinkering with designs and ideas, and then have the right discussions and build out the software. But most people don't work like that. Waterfall takes over because business prefers the rapid ability to say, now work on this, now change this, because if they want to change their priorities, it's easier. But if you've got all this work set out, it's a lot harder to do. So yeah, I've worked in those workplaces. It's hard to put that experience into perspective because there's little to learn from absolute failure. Yeah. Again, the whole estimation becoming toxic, that worries me a little bit. Estimation. So estimation should never include anybody who is not a developer or is not engineering focused, right? Right now we're including QA into our estimation, and I don't think that should be done, right? I disagree with that strongly, because the estimation should be, here's how long the work should take, right? We don't know how long it'll take to test. QA can have some of their own opinions, and QA should be heavily involved with the discussion so they understand what is being changed and how it affects the system, so they can ask relevant questions. But QA and engineering are not similar disciplines, in so much as one is focused essentially on breaking what has been built, and one is essentially on building it, right? So, morning, Apex. How are you doing? Anyone other than the devs estimating, I disagree with. Anyone other than, you disagree with my statement that anyone other than devs should estimate? Do not estimate, rather. Okay. Yeah, QA. I'm not saying QA can't have their own estimates, right? I just don't think they should be taken into account. I don't think QA should not be tasked with completing everything they need to do in the same sprint as the work. It might happen that way, right? But I don't think they should be held to the same timeline. I've heard it suggested that QA should go a sprint out of step, say, right? So they're always 1 week after work has been completed. And it very much depends on having good people doing the things, right? But I don't think QA estimate should not roll up into developer estimate, right? And that QA estimate is based upon, all manner of factors. How complex they feel the system is becoming with this change. I mean, again, if you're building small, effective stories, the QA should be just as small and just as small, right? So, we oftentimes do let ourselves go beyond and build large projects as part of stories. Why is it that QA takes so long for you? What do you do if QA is the definition of done? I'm trying to think about how to. I have something. I have an experience I want to share. I just don't know if I can effectively. Who's doing the work should estimate it as they are probably the most familiar with that section. Right. So again, if we go back to the idea of a standard story, right? If we go back to, let's say this is a standard story, right? This is estimated at 3. Everything is relative to this story. Is it more or less difficult? Is it twice as difficult? Is it half as difficult, right? Measure off of that, come up with that scale. It doesn't matter if my scale is your scale, right? As long as the team has a scale, right? And that's all we're estimating. We're not estimating time. We're not putting, I mean, time will eventually become a kind of guideline, but it's unavoidable because we want to put time on everything, but we shouldn't try and, oh, that'll take 3 hours, it's a 3 or whatever. QA takes so long because QA, in my experience, are not experts on the system they are using, which is a mistake. I think, here's what I think. Product management and QA should not be assigning work if they do not understand the system they are being asked to change at all. Right? Product management shouldn't be setting work out if they have no idea how the system works, right? So they shouldn't be taking requirements from customers. They shouldn't be doing anything until they understand how the system works. QA should understand intimately how a system works because they know what they're testing. I think QA is an effective piece of the development team. I think that software is not developed well alone, right? You have to have a team, right, to build large scale software. QA is an essential part, and if we're building the stories correctly, to the point, end of, right now, the stories I'm building in day to day are way too big, with way too much scope, with no understanding of what it is that there's actually being tested. So sadly, some bitter recent experience has made me really kind of evaluate that. Now, in an ideal world, everything's in step. So the QA, I believe that development should stop. If we do a 2-week sprint, I believe that no development should happen after Wednesday AM, and everything should be QA'd and ready and tied up by the end of the sprint, if that's the release cycle. If we do daily releases, then work should be done, and the day before QA'd, validated, and then the next day that work goes out. If you can build that sort of pipeline. And it all comes down to the team, right? It all comes down to the effectiveness of the people you're working with, the ability to adapt, the ability to change, and the willingness of management to say, this is how we're going to do things, right? If you've not got a very dynamic, adaptable team, or a team that's stuck in their ways, then it's not necessarily easy. What we decided was measure how long the release took, no blame involved. So if it takes 2-3 months to release a feature, there's time to automate the test for sure. And if with test it takes 1-2 months, that's better. Right. And again, it's quite clear here that we all have very different experiences of building software, right? Different approaches, different ideas. And you know, that's why things like this appear, right? Because people take those experiences and try and define them as being, here's what it should be. But then newer developers come along and treat this as a hard and fast rule as to how you do things, right? But it doesn't work that way. So then when it doesn't fit, they try and make it fit, and it makes more of a mess. Does management micromanage the teams? Does the team want to change the current state? They would really not enjoy working in a team which has a process as you stated. Uh, uh-huh. Well, I will say that my real name is fully out there and that I will not. Um, yeah, there's some practices that we need to change. Um, yeah. The I will say there's a reason I'm building this software, right? There's a reason that I feel passionate about this. I want to learn, I want to grow. Maybe I fall foul of some of my own thoughts on this. Maybe this doesn't work out, right? But I do not want to. I don't like seeing teams fail, right? That's the heart of what I care about, right? I see the differences, I see the challenges. I do know what I need to ask for, and Dota, to your point of this thing, right? This is exactly what I've been asking for, right? This is the sort of stuff that is helpful even if it's just a checklist to try and go through, right? We don't always hold hard and fast to this, because if we try and do that, what happens if you try and get a story and you try and break it down into little pieces all the time, and it doesn't necessarily fit, you end up just putting stories in for the sake of putting stories in. Then you end up with some organizational problems. You end up with knock-on effects. So again, being pragmatic about what you're doing with these things and being realistic, right? Sometimes there are some things that don't quite fit just as neatly as a book says. Um, um, yeah, it's a difficult process to go through, and in an ideal world, the team gets along well and functions and is able to have honest discussions. Being presented with this work enough ahead of time to evaluate what it is the key, right? If I drop this in your lap today, I shouldn't expect it today, right? I should expect it at the end of the sprint, maybe, if it's urgent. But again, I shouldn't expect this for at least another 2 sprints, right? Because I've got to give you time enough to evaluate, to break it down, to make sure that it is the way it should be. As a developer, being good at doing the work in my mind is the key. And management have reasonable expectations. And expectations need to be managed as well. You need to work with management that is willing to accept that you are the expert. It's not easy if yeah. And here's a phrase that I would imagine most of you have heard if you've worked in software for any level of time, right? You've heard someone who is not a developer say, "It is just," right? It is just changing the tickets that I see, right? So when they see this, when they think of this, right, they might tell other people, yeah, it's just this, right? And I've sadly worked with multiple PMs who have told people and based expectations on their understanding of what it is, right? So I've just infuriates me, right? It will trigger me every time, and I've in 3 different places now I think I've become a bit of a joke in that if I hear the word just, I jump in. I'm like, well, are you going to do it then? Right? Or I pick it up. I never let it go, ever. It infuriates me to this day. And I've been doing that for over 15 years of it's just like, stop. Stop dictating what you think the work actually involves just because you think this is a nice small story. I understand it, right? And I also get on developers who actually accommodate these things, right? When they're like, yeah, it's just this, right? If in a meeting a developer does that, it infuriates me because it's not helpful to do that. It's not helpful to promote the fact that it is easy. It might be really simple. If we're developing a good software platform, it might be really simple. But the reality is, as a business, they need honesty and transparency, not optimism, right? If you feel that it is quick, great, go and deliver it quickly. Go and deliver it ahead of time. If it is relatively the same difficulty as another story, point it the same. Set the expectations the same. Don't tell them, oh, that's easy. We'll just put a 2 on that one, right? Or we'll make that a 1 because it's nice and simple. And it's not about being obstructive. It's about being realistic. Sometimes things pop up and cause all sorts of problems. So don't assume that you know everything about something unless you absolutely do when you've already written it. So why are we pointing it? The task would help with that issue. If it's adding a button and then see the 7 tickets for different code editions, they'll realize it's not just adding a button text to a screen. Tasks might not be built large, but I don't agree with adding technical tasks to the story. Because again, it can be misinterpreted as well. Tasks might not be built out during a planning session because the work is getting its first review. Yeah, exactly. You shouldn't be actually dictating what the code does before you actually sit down and write the actual code. You should be able to outline the top areas and have a discussion with teammates about what it is to develop the software. But you shouldn't be sitting there with the PMs telling them what's what. Yeah. Because you're dictating. Why do you not think technical tasks should be linked to a story? I think that you shouldn't be writing down. Well, depends on the tooling, right? I don't have an objection to, let's say you and I sit down, we've talked, okay, as a user, I should see unassigned tickets assigned to me, right? So I don't mind if you and I sit down afterwards and say, okay, need to add a filter to the query, to the API. No, that's not going to work, is it? That's not. Update query. To return, right? I don't mind us capturing things like that, right? That's not necessarily a problem, but it should be we as developers sit down and kind of briefly go over those things, right? Someone should go and look at code or roughly get an estimate of what the code looks like before going into meetings, so that you can be kind of a subject matter expert on that, like before you plan, because then you have a better idea and you can explain things. One of the hard parts is actually the pointing scenario, is because PMs are often in there, and every PM I've worked with has always tried to sway the discussion, right? Or like, oh, well, I'll take those points. It's not like a do a deal, right? Include null or current user identifier, right? So I don't object to this. It should just not be in the story, right? It shouldn't be tasked out as actual update API, do this, do this, do this. It should be kind of a discussion that goes on as a general reminder, because if you pick up the story or I pick up the story, we've had the discussion, we know what we're actually working on, and we're on the same path. Sometimes stories aren't always nice and clear cut either. Sometimes a story might inadvertently include an architectural change, which I've also experienced. Most developers are not willing to go and change the way the software works. So you have to you can't do that as a tasked out story necessarily, because no one else can just pick it up. So but I don't like technical tasks being there, because if it looks simple here, again, the PMs are empowered. They're like, oh, well, it's just this. And I have had PMs copy and paste because they think it's the same story. They copy and paste everything into the new story. I don't like what you wrote as a task, too low level. I'm not tasking it. That's a reminder of what we need to do. I'm not tasking it out. I do not task the stories. I agree that it shouldn't be put in the story description. We typically use like a child task from the story. I don't. Jira does a horrible job of tasks, right? I hate tasks in Jira, right? If a story is small, as Ender was saying before, right? If a story is actually small enough, right, There shouldn't need to be tasks because the story is the task. No worries, Dota. Thank you very much, as always, for the discussion. Yeah, and this is fun because it's different. Our different experiences clearly give us different perspectives on some of these things, and this is why streaming this is fun, right? Because I get to experience other people who are willing to talk about it and not jaded by the so much so by the process that they don't they don't care. First, you have to answer the question: why do you want some tasks? Do you need them so PO can see that you do work? Does your PO even care about your technical subtasks? Do these subtasks give you? Or yeah, in Jira, what happens is right this board starts to fill up because if you subtask in Jira, right, I think this might actually do it here, right? Actually, this has a better system, right? So if I do task it, right, filter API, update query, say, right? If I do it that way, this just presents that there's tasks to be done on it. Jira creates them as separate cards. I don't know if that's overridable, but by default, every time I've done that, Jira does that. The way I've used them to have a way to show PMs progress on the story and more junior develop people want to break down work and steps they can achieve. I work with a lot of co-ops. Yeah. Okay. So I'm writing software, right? Jira makes separate. If you task out stories in Jira, then you've had a setting turned on to join them underneath. Oh no, but they're actually on the board. Each individual task is on the board, and it makes a lot of noise. So Ender, I don't know if you've been here the last couple of sprints. The last couple of streams at all. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to write that software, right? I'm trying to look at this software from this perspective of what are the challenges, and maybe I get through this and find I really don't like anything, right? But I want to build this, and my focus is on visibility. So to the point of right, no one should care about progress. If we're doing this right and we're building good, trusting teams, right, progress is showed by the story moved from in progress, from ready to be worked on to in progress to it's done, right? Daily updates should be I'm moving forward with this, it will be done. And again, in the world where we're making smaller stories, daily updates should be yeah, that got done yesterday. Here's this other thing that I'm going to work on today. There we go. That's all that needs to be done. If something's stuck, right, a review date should be set on it, and that review date would indicate to people it's overdue a little bit, right? There's something to talk about here, right? That's kind of what I want to focus on. Oftentimes during a sprint, it doesn't matter as long as the work gets done, and developers should be trusted to say, this is the amount of work we can take in this sprint, right? If you feel you want to be super ambitious and take on 50 points in a sprint, whereas our normal sprints are 40 points, then you are making a guarantee you'll get it done. So you're the ones that are deciding that you're going to work stupid hours, right? You shouldn't do it, but you are doing it. So I don't agree that putting tasks on stories shows progress, because all that does is if you're breaking it down into a way that someone else can pick up the story and you are they are technical in nature, then that just says you've checked off a box, right? I could litter the stories with checkboxes and say, yeah, I'm making progress. Look, I checked off 3 boxes. Anybody looking at that sprint board is looking at it for where is the work? Where is it currently sat? Is it overdue, right? And overdue is the sprint's passed. Anything you agree to take in a sprint, you've got a sprint to complete, right? personal responsibility, right? Accountability. These are things that matter. So, and junior developers, if they're not comfortable with the software, that's where I was going for. The software follows some strong patterns, right? It follows, here's how to get into the software. Here's the thing it's going to do. These are established, right? And this is the sort of stuff that I believe that teams should be responsible for owning, so that they all agree on what the software should be. So if I bring in a developer day one, and I've gone through this experience, I've brought people into software like this, and it's taken them less than a day to get up to speed, right? Here's the patterns we follow, right? We take a request, we forward that request to a query, to a handler, to this, to that. If it's a query, it'll be pretty obvious. It's a list, I'm going to get a query, right? We take that and we do this, and here's the things we use, here's the tools we use, etc. There shouldn't, if you're giving junior developers much creativity, right, then that should be pairing. That's a pairing scenario, ideally, right? So I don't think it should be tasked out, right? And again, if we sit down to discuss it and we want to capture some things, those things should be captured, especially if they are gotchas. But overall, if we develop, most day-to-day software should be developed in pretty much a consistent way. So that's my opinions. Again, my experiences have led to these opinions, right? Maybe different experiences lead to different. And that's the key. That's the most important thing about the entire software development process, from beginning to end: consistency. If we are consistent in the way we do things, they will flow smoothly, right? If we're consistently getting stories prepared ahead of time, we are consistently reviewing them on a schedule, we are consistently analyzing them, pushing back on them, we are allowed to push back, and those stories get put in, and we are consistently completing the stories on time, on schedule. We're getting them to QA, to your point, Ender. The ability to complete within a sprint those pieces of work, right? So QA are in step and completing pieces. We've got consistent environments to work with. We've got consistent prep, and then a consistent release schedule / delivery system on the other end. Things will work smoothly, but it'll take a lot of work to get to that point. We are a very client-facing team, so we ended up with little control over our work. Client-facing team in so much as you were developing products that were that the customers were demanding changes to straight away. Huh. My token expired. So let's go into the back half of the stream today. So tomorrow and Friday, by the way, will be longer streams. I've got PTO, so I will do at the minimum 3-hour streams tomorrow and Friday. So they will be slightly longer. So hopefully get a lot more done. Hopefully. So let's talk about one of the things I wanted to cover, and this again is going to be this may fall foul of some opinions. That's okay. But it's one that is a tough challenge once you start designing software the way I'm doing it, right? So I've asked for a list of tickets, right? Unassigned, and assigned. And it's this started this entire conversation, right? This seems like a simple story, right? And this should highlight why it's important to discuss what is expected of a ticket way ahead of time. So as a user, I should see unassigned tickets, unassigned, and tickets assigned to me. As a support user, I should be able to see a list of tickets. I should only see unassigned tickets and those tickets assigned to my user. Great. So I go in and I make the change. And I've roughly made this change already because obviously I did it in prototyping, right? So I go to queries, I got get tickets, right? All tickets, and I pass in assigned to user. And in here, I haven't used it yet, but what I will do is modify this to say where assigned to user ID is this or it's null. Great, that'll function. Then I'll show that, right? So I would have completed the spec as this is standing, right? Then I'll complete that. And they'll say, how do I know what's unassigned and what's assigned to you? So we could cheat, and in the vein of getting it working, I can include the assigned to user ID in here. So now this has assigned to user ID null or assigned to user ID GUID. And I say, yeah, that's my GUID. Well, I can't read that. I don't know that's you. So do we need that requirement right now? Do we need to know who is assigned to a ticket? Yeah, it'd be useful, right? Because that GUID means nothing. And if you just pass down the GUID, so thinking from the engineering perspective, if I just pass down the GUID, whatever system consumes this API now needs to be responsible for knowing the users and then joining this list of data, right? Now, maybe in a modern UI with something like NGRX, etc., maybe that's an acceptable thing. I don't know yet. I haven't explored that. Where you can say, hey, here's one data source, now here's another data source, now join these two data sources together, and now you can produce the list on the client in real time. Right? I haven't explored that possibility yet. So for right now, that gives me a challenge in that I need to produce the username out of this system when I don't have a username in this system. So one option here, and the option I will likely take at this stage, is I need to have a users collection in here, right? But users don't belong in the ticketing system, right? So why and how? So why is because I do not want to join these two APIs together, right? There's no value in joining the APIs together. I don't want to make that happen. That would be bad practice because then I would have dependencies across each other, right? If I don't have the user, this shouldn't fail, right? It should just not show information. It should be very obvious. But in the same, like, this should not fail if the ticket system doesn't build or isn't available, etc. So if I build a cross API dependency, then I build a deployment dependency as well, right? I build a need for both systems to be available at the same time. Whereas if this system goes down, this system should still function just fine if this is not affected by the same problem, right? So again, we're now creeping beyond a simple story. We're talking about a need to introduce an architectural concern. And again, this is why this should be discussed ahead of time. Like, what are your actual expectations? And this is where, I'm developing the stories. I'm biased. These stories are never going to be perfect. They're going to continually be what I'm focused on, right? So I'm never going to be presenting the PM in the truest sense, right? I'm actually probably representing the worst possible PM, right? The worst case scenarios we've discussed. But realistically, this isn't just to see in a list of tickets because I want to see the name, right? So, I should only see unassigned tickets. I should see the name of the user assigned or no. that explodes this story into way more work. But if we go back to the article before, right? Valuable. Every story should add some increment of visible value for users. If I break this story up, right? The first story is I need to get users into the ticketing system in some way, shape, or form. But if I make that its own story, that doesn't add visible value. You can't see it. Only when this story is done can you do that, right? So, but as you develop your story splitting skills, you'll get better at finding thin slices of functionality that deliver direct value. Right? But then they go on to this, right? Stories don't need to provide enough value by themselves to be worth shipping. You might need to accumulate several stories to move from valuable to marketable. Right? So what is valuable then? Right? This is too big. Splitting it up would be the right thing to do, in that I should have a story for producing the user into the ticketing system. But that would add no value because you wouldn't be able to see the outcome. There'd be no visible outcome of that until this story was done. So I build a story dependency. So why not do it all as one part of the story? And this is the sort of discussion that goes on, right? Like, am I pulling stories apart to pull stories apart? Am I actually trying to actually do something and get some software in? So I'm going to take the horrible path here, which is take this all as one large story, because it's the more practical way to move forward with the process. But it is worth thinking about, like, what would you do? How would you tackle this challenge, right? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? I don't know. Gotta learn, right? So let's go. Make sure I update, make sure I've pulled everything down. We'll get into how to do this. So if I was to task this out, right, as a general task, it would be I need to produce a user when they're added, right? And we'll go into another challenge there afterwards. Going to produce a user that was added. And then we're going to, reply. Then we're going to add them to the ticketing system. And when they're added to the ticketing system, we are going to then be able to proceed with this and join their user on their assigned user ID. We get into another issue, right? We've already got existing data. How do we migrate what we have? So that kind of goes to, they make a comment about temporarily building some scaffolding. Well, temporarily building some scaffolding here involves a lot more, right? And again, that story doesn't add value, right? Because the temporary scaffolding is, I need to export the users. So I'm going to treat this as if this system is completely disposable, right? And that's what I'm going to aim for in the end, right? When you have a breaking doc, can you pass that other doc you're reading from? Yes, yeah, sorry. I'll, yeah. It is this one. There you go. So if I'm doing this right, and the way I want to develop this is I want to build a system that is completely tear down, build up, right? So that I don't have to deal with this scenario of what happens at this stage, right? At this stage, there is no product. There is no users of this product. There is no consistency that I have to worry about. right? If I'm building this the wrong way at this stage, right, then I also have to consider, how do I take existing test data and move it into this new system, or transfer it across? So I have to write scripts to transfer data from a database out into Couchbase. You know, that's a whole lot of mess and a whole lot of time. And this story then blows up beyond that, right? This story now got way bigger, and I can't create a story for that because it doesn't have independent value. It's not independent. It is completely dependent. So if I'm trying to hold hard and fast to these rules, then I don't have any choices. So I've got to make some choices. And my choice is, I'm going to treat the system like it is completely disposable, right? I'm going to wipe it out, essentially, and start again. And as I move forward, I will have to work towards a version where I can deploy it, build it up, put temporary data, put test data in there so it's consistently usable and visible from the start, and then dispose of at the end, and no harm, no foul, right? Maybe that is, I need to create a script to create tenant users, or even just have a testing tenant in Auth0 where I can delete users, add users, etc. Wipe out the databases, wipe out Couchbase, wipe out all this stuff every single time, right? So that's how I'm going to treat it for now. Once it became a product, then your concerns are different, right? Because you have to, the value is, we are adding a new data, we are adding a new dependency, we need to export this data from A to B. Here we go, here's how we do it, right? So yeah, let's start this story. New branch, feature / T14, I believe. T14, yes. T14. List tickets. The tickets right now assigned to me. And again, if you're just joining, I notice the viewer number is increasing slightly. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to pass opinions. I have no issue with discussion on this stuff. It is part of the process, and a big reason as to why I'm doing this. So feel free. If you want me to look over something or review something, just let me know. Okay, so we start with the challenge, right? How do we get users into work items? So we're going to touch Kafka to do this. And I will do as much of this as I can today. And whatever I don't finish, obviously, I will pick up tomorrow, and again, have a bit more time tomorrow. I have a standing desk, but my back has been hurting me enough to make standing right now not comfortable. But I'm not. I slouch too much. So I apologize if I've kind of gone forward in the camera a little bit more. Okay, so work items is the project for tickets, right? I've called it work items because it's not just going to be tickets, stories and planned stories, which I do intend to make a different thing, will live in here. Oh, I still have an itchy nose, it's bugging me. So what event do I know about? Well, I know that when a user is registered, right? A tenant user was registered. I have an event. I have a notification, right? Because I do something with the Saga, right? My Saga deals with tenant user was registered because it can start the tenant registration Saga, which when it publishes will complete and publish the tenant is ready, is the goal, right? Tenant is ready will publish the event to Kafka. I'm just checking on something quickly because the handlers, this didn't happen yesterday. It's kind of concerning me because it did it didn't do all the right pieces. So I think we have CB. That clearly worked. Okay, we'll come back around on that. So I don't need to care about, there's no saga here, right? This is, if a tenant user was registered, I have this handler, right, which creates the user in here. But now I'm back into the single responsibility. I don't want to publish an event from Kafka to Kafka from here, because this is not responsible for that, right? This is responsible for registering that user with auth0. And in theory, I think mediator has the same concept as mediator, in that it has you can actually override the behavior of the the notification system, and actually have it as kind of its own internal queue. But I can add another handler, is my point here, right? Because these handlers here are registered as handlers of those events as well, right? Tenant user was registered is also listed to here. So I need another subscriber to that, right? But I get into the naming. Actually, I get into another challenge, thinking through the process. I don't publish to work items the fact that tenant exists until the first user confirms the tenant. So I can't listen to tenant user as registered and publish an event, because I don't have a bucket, or rather a scope, to put the user in. If I hold to the idea that the system isn't ready until the tenant is confirmed, so confirmation of a tenant, for those who haven't been here before, the act of registering a new company kicks off the process. So I come to the first time for the website and I say, hey, I want to register a new account. I give it a company name, I give it an address, I give it my email and my name. And what that does is it creates a new tenant in the tenant management system. It assigns an address and assigns that to that tenant. It creates a new user in the system just for information's sake, and then adds links that to that tenant, and then it publishes the event that the tenant user was registered. The tenant user was registered kicks off the auth0 piece and says, hey, now go register this with auth0, right? It's all part of that pipeline. And at each point, the Saga is sat there listening and updating its state based upon these events coming in, so that it knows when it's complete to publish the event to say tenant was completed, right? That tenant completed event is listened to on Kafka, and that is consumed by the work items consumers, which then says, oh, a new tenant was created. Let's create a scope for that tenant under the workflow, under the bucket, right? So I only have one bucket here, work items. Underneath that bucket, I have scopes. This scope is my tenant identifier, right? Because the data is scoped to that tenant. Under here, I have tickets and tenant information, right? So if I go into this one, I'll see T6 new tenant ID, new tenant, and under here the tickets. But if I published an event when the tenant user was registered, I'm also going to receive that tenant user was registered at the same time as this does, right? And I'm going to publish an event to Kafka to say, register, a tenant user was registered, or whatever it is, and consume it in work items, but work items doesn't know about the tenant. So I kind of have I suppose it's a chicken and egg here, and a choice. And maybe this means that Saga isn't required because I don't have a choice in doing what I'm about to do. It might actually negate the entire need for that Saga, which I'm okay with. That's not that I'm not going to hold on to the idea of the Saga because it was a lot of work to do it. I gain a vast amount of information from doing that, right? And from a coordination perspective, I still think that was a good thing to do. But maybe I now have to accept that I cannot avoid creating data because there's kind of a, it's not idempotency really, but it is, the tenant needs to exist to put this data in. I can't create this tenant until I've completed everything else, but this event is what is going to trigger the fact that a tenant user was registered. So the tenant, that system needs to know about the users. So the most practical way of dealing with this is to do that. Now, coming back on the whole planning and stuff, right? I didn't know about this before coming to this code, right? How much of this code do I need to understand? And how much of this system do I need to refresh myself on? Because 6 months from now, when this is 2 or 3 dozen of these services and it is way bigger in scope, I'm not going to remember how this functions specifically. I should be able to pick it up pretty quickly, but I'm not going to remember the specifics, right? So it all comes back around on that whole consistency and that knowledge piece, right? Where PMs and QA should all understand how the system is functioning as a whole. I can map timelines, I can map charts of workflows and data flows, etc. That will help in the long term. But this challenge specifically wouldn't necessarily have presented itself before that planning piece. And if I was asked to do the work right on the back of the sprint, yeah, that would be extremely difficult. So I don't think I have an option, right? I think I have to make the tenant piece kind of idempotent in so much as there's going to be a separate event without a doubt. But that will always be the kickoff event for the saga, for the tenant on the other side, because this event would be published long before tenant is complete or tenant is ready, whatever it is. So my tenant created event in here, my handler here, tenant created handler. This receives it, establishes the tenant. What I now need to do would be have tenant user was tenant user created. Assigned tenant user. The user might exist, so I'm not creating, but I am creating the tenant user. Let's just go with the same terminology for right now. We'll evaluate that later, right? And this would be public GUID user identifier, public GUID tenant identifier, public string name, right? And you could argue that that's a little bit too much information, but that's going to be necessary, right? I'm going to have to publish the name, right? I'm going to have to capture that piece in the work items component to be able to make the system work the way I want it to work, in that I'm going to join that information and pull it down through the list. So if I do this, this is never going to really matter, right? All that's going to matter is the first time I see this tenant. Does it exist? No. Initialize the tenant and then go on, right? So is that a bitter pill to swallow? Yes, because the sagas, again, was a lot of work, but it's not the right thing to have in the system. It's not. It's more practical to do it this way. So I need to think about my naming here right a second. If this was register user on tenant user was registered handler, right? And this is publish on tenant user was registered handler. How does that feel? Not ideal. My naming's a little off, I think. But that would allow me to do that. Right. And in here, I need private read-only event publisher. So event publisher is a wrapper around Kafka pieces, just to try and abstract that a little bit more. And again, later on when I go to Outbox, this event publisher would actually be the Outbox, which would then go to Kafka, right? Right now it's all wired up to Kafka. Outbox is something that I need to do. And that's not even going to go into my work list right now because that's a whole lot. And that's a technical debt piece, right? That's another point of story planning, right? When you get to technical debt, what do? Right? Technical debt has to be addressed, but it doesn't always have visible value. So what do you do there? Okay, so in here, let's do CTOR, repository user repository, and event publisher, initialize field. I do not want to make it a primary constructor. I don't think everything fits neatly as a primary constructor, right? Yes, I can move that down there, but now this goes over here, and yeah, I don't like that. Because what it's suggesting I do there is that. Not really a fan. And again, because you have different access control, right? Those are completely changeable. It sets the wrong standard, so I'm trying to limit my use of primary constructors right a second. And I'll evaluate it later. I think what's going to end up, they're going to end up sort of like a read-only or something like that. They're going to do something like that on primary constructors, because underneath it'll wire up to something like this anyway. Okay, so this is always going to happen, right? So this is always going to need to do publish async Wait. New tenant user created. So we're going to need the user. Var user equals user repository dot single default async new entity ID by identifier spec user, and it's going to take our notification dot user identifier, right? So that's our query to get our user out. We need to await it. If user is null for whatever reason, return. Otherwise, name equals user.name. Tenant identifier equals notification.tenant identifier. User identification, user identifier. Cancellation token. So tenant user created needs to be I event. No. Tenant user created needs to be what? Default event. Default event as an event ID, then occurred on, right? That's why. Okay, so that's that. So now tenant created doesn't exist anymore. And now all that goes away, right? And that goes away, right? Because we don't need the sagas at this point. That was a fun exploration and a fun challenge. I don't regret building a library, and I don't regret doing it. And maybe I'll need it in the future. Maybe it will actually come in handy. But right now, having it in the code is not something I want to leave behind. Yes, it's a lot of behavior to delete, but it's safer for the application, right, to get rid of that information and make sure that I'm not leaving lies left in the code, right? You don't want to leave that there just for fear, right? So I actually commented on Apex yesterday. You went in and you were refactoring to replace the strings, and you just deleted something, and I was like, yes, because most people I watch would do comment. And I'm like, yeah, that's the right way. Just go at it. So I need to change this up slightly, right? In that I kind of need another topic. And this topic now changes, right? Because this is now tenant user created. Right? That's actually the namespace name, so it can actually deserialize the right type, right? So that's that. And then this is my actual event, so tenant user created. Kafka's one of those things still where I've never actually seen anybody put down a pure definition of what an event actually is. I've read a lot on Kafka. I've looked a lot at Kafka. I've asked questions about what is an actual event? What do you treat as an actual event? How granular do you go? Because I've seen people use it as a message bus. I've seen people create like tickets as a topic and then have added and deleted and updated as events inside of that topic. So yeah, if you've used Kafka and you have any opinions on that, please share. I would love to know how other people see it. So I need to do that. I need to do K8. No, where are you? I need to go here. Tools. Got it. So I've been using, he says, this tool that is no longer showing. There we go. Okay. Cadillac 507 is now available. What version am I on though? I thought it was on. Oh, there we go. That's better. I go into there. I can then go into connection info nodes. Okay, so I can delete that topic. Delete one stream. Right. And create a topic, Liquid Sky Dev, and this would be Liquid Sky, tenant user created. No one's the owner, partitions 1, replications 1. I'm not scaling out this system, right? So I do not need multiple partitions. So partitions in Kafka allow you, so if I have one partition, I can literally process one message at once per consumer, right? So I can only realistically connect one consumer to one partition to get throughput, right? If I spool up 10 consumers for the same topic on one partition, they'll just get the messages one after the other, right? If I want scale out, I increase the number of partitions, my data will be put into different partitions, then the consumers can go there. So I don't want to create 2 partitions if I only have one consumer, right? Which in the development environment, 1-to-1 is fine because the speed is fast enough for that. But if I wanted maximum throughput, I might put 8 partitions there and then connect 8 consumers to it, right? So I've done a lot of testing around how Kafka deals with those things, and yeah, it's 1-to-1 pretty much. So creating your topic before you run the software is important. Don't let the software create it, because by default it'll always be 1. So if you leave that behavior in there and you get out of that habit, get into that habit, what will happen is you go to production and it creates a tenant, it creates the partition, or creates the topic with 1 partition. You cannot update the partitions after you've gone live. So you need to know what world you're living in. You can have 8 partitions and 2 consumers, right? They'll just go through, hey, they'll separate out the partitions themselves, and Kafka will distribute appropriately. So you can deal for that long term, but you cannot change partitions after you've created the topic. So you kind of need to have an idea. Like you see this one, Docker Connect to offsets, 25 partitions, right? And on transactions and consumers, 50 and 50. So I could have lots of things connected to these things, and they'd just be chewing through them quickly. So it is worth knowing about. In a development environment, I don't care. It's 1-to-1. In an actual production environment, I need to configure these topics before I go live. And I haven't really figured out scripting of those pieces yet. So yeah, we'll see if we can get this at least functional enough. So let's remove the tenant created event, right? And now this handler changes, right? So first we need tenant user created is going to go to the tenant user created handler. This is going to be tenant user created. And that's going to be our event. So it's not the end of the world. No, not what I want to do. Not what I want to do. Think. I do want that. I do want it. Yeah, give me it back. I do want this. Of course I want this. I've got the company name. I've got the same problem as before. I just went blindly through one path there and didn't even consider the other path. I still need to do this separately, right? This is not something that is going to be... I still need to do more code. But this still exists, right? And this actually might hit first, right? Now, the beauty of Kafka over something like N-Service Bus or Mass Transit is if I'm publishing to the topics, they're going to get processed in order, right? I could still potentially have different consumers here, though, for tenant created versus tenant user was created, right? Tenant created handler. Why are you not valid anymore? Did I just break that? You just completely blocked? There you go. Okay. So I could get tenant user created before tenant created. So idempotency for certain needs to be handled, right? We can come back around and add tenant user created. Let me do this. Services to add transient, tenant user created, builder.add event receiver, tenant user created, tenant user created handler. So the way I've written this, by the way, the underlying pieces is this will actually spool up 2 tasks and run them each. And then I have event receiver, tenant user created. I have this dispatching Kafka consumer will receive these and basically dispatch them using essentially mediator, right? So that's why it's structured that way. So this creates an individual task. I have some core code that is like the multi-worker, the multi-consumer, no, multi-worker process or something like that, right? This worker. And what it would do is allow me to control, so I can, in the development environment, I can start all these up in one console application. I can have all the handlers in here. When I actually distribute it, I can actually distribute it and say, hey, by the way, this one handles tenant created and this one handles tenant user created. So I can spool the same service up to deal with the specific events. And that, because otherwise I have the same problem, right? This will receive those events in a serial manner. Because what this does underneath is event consumer, dispatching consumer, configure. Wow, I put a lot of structure in here. It creates a consumer for each topic. But I've noticed in the past that Kafka doesn't necessarily deal very well with having them all in the same service, and then you end up with a serialized problem anyway, where this one gets handled, then this one gets handled, and you slow the throughput. So allowing myself to configure the services to say, oh, you're going to deal with tenant created and you're going to deal with tenant user created, etc., allows me when I deploy these to actually spool up individual instances of the same service, just telling it which topics it should focus on. And that's worked in the past. Now, we still have a challenge here because we don't know, right, what exists. So initialize tenant. Let me go to IM context, and then we'll talk about what happens tomorrow. Initialize tenant actually goes and gets the cluster, creates the tenant scope, and prepares it. Right. So this is actually the core of what I need to do is here. This might happen before this happens. So how do I handle that? I avoided putting most of this in context. I don't necessarily want to create the collections when the user's created, because that's a separate, because right now what I need is await unit of work, but initialize collection user. And the reason I don't initialize the collections anywhere else is because it adds an index, it adds a default index, and does all sorts of other things. But I kind of need to do that if the tenant isn't already initialized. So in Couchbase, I'm going to need to say, hey, does a scope exist, or rather the tenant, right? If not, initialize, which will give me the tenant and the scope, right? I don't know the tenant information, so I'm not going to do this part, right? This part has to come from this process, right? Then does a collection exist? Tenant users, or users as far as this is within a tenant, right? So it's implicitly tenant users. And if not, initialize and then populate, right? So I need to do some extra pieces here to say, hey, initialize if not exists, maybe. Because then I could do initialize if not exists. And that way, I just need these two lines. And then the tenant user created handler can test to see if the collection exists for that. And if it doesn't, create that. And then it can add its user. Initialize collection as well was tricky. Yeah, the add primary index, that was challenging. This will actually throw an exception, but this was the safest way of doing it. So yeah, I need to do that. It will error if I try and recreate it, so I need to know. So yeah, maybe I need to have an override that is public. Oh no, I'm running out of time. Public value task, initialize collection if not exists. That reads really funny, but yeah, seems like I'm going to end up relying upon the tries. But again, as I get to know more about the Couchbase API, some of this will get a little simpler, some will get a little easier. I just need the concept. So essentially what I'm saying is, hey, look, do this. We'll call this initialize tenant if not exists. Right, which at the very worst will just verify the tenant scope exists. And then get a unit of work, right? Again, that is because it's wrapped up in a work item context and then begins a unit of work because I scope everything. So then everything is just relative to that scope. It's not, I don't have to keep adding the scope into every single request. It just makes that cleaner. So if I do it this way, at least it's recreatable between the two. And this just needs to test to see if the collection exists, and then if not, add it. And that's kind of the idempotency part, where it's populating the pieces it needs to do its work without caring about the rest. Right? It should be captured. I should not lose this information. If I build up this dependency between the handlers, I will risk losing more information. So having it be able to recreate the pieces it needs at the very basic is necessary. And that's the same. If you publish an event that has, or you wanted to work with an object that has multiple sources, multiple events, right? Then being able to capture, hey, this is the one that created it. It's kind of like the Saga thing, right? Something creates it and kicks it off, and then other pieces update the data. That's okay. But the key thing to remember here is I'm not recreating the user here. I'm capturing the information for the user this system is still the source of truth for that user. This is the only system that can change user. This is the only system that can trigger a notification that a user was changed. So that is the way that will be. But anyway, it's 9:06. I do have to finish up. I've got to get to work, and I also have two dogs that have been very good again. I will return tomorrow. I will be on from 7 a.m. and I will be around until probably around 10:30 a.m. my time. So a 3.5 hour stream tomorrow, likely. We'll get this finished up and knocked out. We'll then talk about what the next steps are under the next pieces. So yeah, let's have a look. I would imagine Apex is already streaming. Yeah, let's raid over to Apex again. Apex is working on Godot, on game stuff. So if you are listening and you haven't yet followed him, I would highly recommend it. It's a nice chill stream to go into, and he's working hard on building some foundational parts for his game. So yeah, let's head over there. And I will return tomorrow, and we'll finish this up and get it knocked out. So thank you very much for joining me. Appreciate it, and I'll see you tomorrow.